In terms of training, can you train mental resilience, or is that just gifted?
No, of course you can.
You can.
Yeah, sure. And you just train your mind like you train your body.
Yeah.
And if you're just training your body every day, then you're doing your mind a disservice. I mean, it's easy to be a victim, right? It's so much harder to look at your situation and get inspiration from it and not be victimized by it.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to be able to turn that page and make something lemonade out of lemons.
We're in a time, let's face it, where people are just being flogged with negativity and bad news and toxicity and just elevating to hatred. And what we want for this podcast is be positive as a mantra, as an attitude, as something that we can call out in those moments where we're challenged and remind ourselves that we do have optimism, hope, and encouragement. And so we invite you in. Enjoy the Be Positive podcast and enjoy hope, optimism, and encouragement. Welcome back to the Be Positive cause, and I'm super excited. Today's episode is going to dive deep, and it's really themed about giving yourself permission, getting yourself out of the way so that you can unfold all of those accomplishments, all of those pursuits, all of those achievements that you want to and aspire to. And oftentimes we just get in the way of ourselves. So Lance Cummings, welcome to the program, and permission. What do you think about that? Do you find in your line of work and what you did with the SEAL community that SEAL candidates get in the way of themselves?
Well, permission's usually something better to be asked for after you've done something.
Yeah.
Forgiveness afterward.
Right.
But SEAL candidates themselves seem to be very well disciplined, and they know what they can and can't get away with, from my experience.
Yeah.
So
You've got a bit of experience. I'm still staggered by the fact that you went 3 decades, 30 years as a SEAL.
right. Well, there's a lot happened in the last 3 decades.
Yeah.
And not all of it made it on mainstream news.
Sure.
But I was very fortunate in my career.
Yeah.
And saw a lot of innovations, with especially around 2000, 2001. But I had a great career. It was a great run.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to keep my finger on the pulse for the community, and giving back, hopefully.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. It strikes me, I look at just the mileage that I have. I was a professional tennis player, and 6'6", running on concrete for 20 years. I have elements that are breaking down just from too much wear and tear. And that's so pale in comparison to what you've put your body through and your mind through and your emotions through. Do you sense that mileage? Do you feel it?
I feel it.
I feel it.
I try to block it out, I guess, as much as possible. But
Yeah.
thank goodness technology is helping us with some replacement parts. And, it appears that you're needing them younger and younger now, especially as the boats get faster. Everything just keeps piling on one after the other, but you can't help but feel it. No one's Superman.
Yeah, I know it. I'm getting replacement parts as well, but I'm factoring them into my age, so I'm maybe 2 surgeries away from going back to my 50s. Let's see if that takes place. So let's talk a little bit about giving yourself permission. And this podcast, like I've shared with you previously, it is all about hope, optimism, encouragement. Really is our battle cry, looking for those things. And there's a particular verse that I have claimed as my life verse, but I think it sets the theme for individuals like yourself. I want to believe for individuals like me, but it comes out of 1 Corinthians and 7:31, and it says, "Live life as if the world has no hold on you." Live life as if the world has no hold on you. And it's, from the outside looking in, that seems to fit the SEAL community.
I would hope so. I think every psychological examination that they try to submit most of the SEAL candidates to, most of them really fall by the wayside. Several years ago, there was an entire class that had gone through a psychological screening, and they had, I guess, checked all the blocks of not going to quit. That was the biggest class of quitters that we had for basic training, because you can't put your finger on it. You can't determine what someone's heart is and what's in their heart and what their motivation is. And you could give them a battery of tests, and all of their answers are really not going to determine what's in their heart when they need motivation.
And it makes me curious because obviously you can train up strength. And
Truly.
all of these candidates can fire the gun and outrun the bullet. But in terms of training, can you train mental resilience, or is that just gifted?
No, of course you can.
You can.
Yeah, sure. And you just train your mind like you train your body.
Yeah.
And if you're just training your body every day, then you're doing your mind a disservice. You're not going to be a full package. But as many different difficult situations as you put yourself into, you continually expand your comfort zone. And that's what it's all about. It's what's your comfort zone and how do you operate outside your comfort zone once you get there. So if you continually put yourself in a situation where you are outside that zone, then that zone becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And pretty soon you can do pretty much anything you want to because you've convinced yourself that you can do it.
So you're moving these candidates outside their comfort zone. Can you see on their face? Is it visible when they're outside of their comfort zone? Eyes flare? What do you look for?
Of course it is, unless you're 3 or 4 days without sleep and then everyone looks like a zombie.
Yeah.
But they're still moving forward. They're still going through the motions. They're still doing the things that's asked of them to do. So facial expressions sometimes distort what you're actually doing and asking yourself to do.
So what comes to mind when I talk about mental resilience? And you're training that up, okay, by exposure of pushing the boundaries out of comfort. But are there specific exercises? Is there a step 1, step 2, step 3, or is it just by exposure?
I think a lot of it is also how you, the people you surround yourself with, and how much comfort you get out of them. So if they're continually making you bring your A game to work every day, and that was one thing that I couldn't find anywhere else in the civilian world, is with the military, especially soft guys. You bring your A game every day or you're called out for it. You're held accountable. And if you're not doing it exactly what you could be expected to do, then they're going to call you out.
Yeah.
And then you do the same thing for each one of your teammates as well. So in retrospect, with my career, I couldn't have worked with any better people, and I've never surrounded myself with better people. And once you're on a winning team, as you know, you continually try to reformulate everything around you until you can be back on a winning team again.
It's interesting that you mentioned that in terms of continuously trying to improve. And I've seen it in athletics where people hit a certain level and they maybe don't state this, but their mindset is, oh, I've arrived. I'm performing at this level, let's say at the top of the collegiate level. Or they get to a certain benchmark on the professional tour. And there's that, not settling, but going, oh, I've made it. And not the mindset of, okay, hold on, I can do better. And I can raise higher. I can increase my performance. I can improve my mental resilience. Mm-hmm. That theme of just always improving, is that woven throughout the SEAL community?
I think it is.
Yeah.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what your adversary is doing. You could think you're the best of your game, but then your adversary can, to me, I continually wake up thinking they're training every day. They're probably training harder than I am. So that's what drives me to get up and do something bigger and better.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what they're doing. And if you're competing in a tennis world and you win a Grand Slam, right, then you know you're better than your adversary. You've met that march. But when there's that hidden element of you don't know what they're doing. If you always have a team that's in front of you and that you're about to play or you're training to play and you don't know what their abilities are, then you have to continually maximize your efforts.
I was 7 matches away from a Grand Slam victory. It was the first round, so
Right
I got bummed out, but had my chance at least. What about that message to the generations following us? The 20s and 30-somethings that are coming up, and do they want accountability?
I hope so. It seems like there's a smaller percentage of the ones that want to be held accountable, and basically to maximize everything that they can do. But we continually look for those people, and generationally, they seem to come out of the same family and the same statistics will tell us the same area of the country. So,
Seriously, I didn't know that.
So
there's a legacy component.
Exactly. So there's so many SEALs now that are in second and third and sometimes fourth generations that are, and they're still bringing it. But it seems like we're getting to that point where we continually have to look at the same generation or the same legacy people to come and step forward.
Yeah, I know several young people that absolutely have fire in their belly. And you can see that steely look, when their eyes narrow and they go, I'm going after this, period. But I don't see that, or I don't recognize that as rampant as maybe I saw it in other age groups. So you're saying the same thing. Maybe there's just a lesser percentage of people that have that kind of drive?
Maybe our father said the same thing about us.
Yeah, it could be, right?
and their father said the same thing about them.
Yeah.
But I think, it just takes a situation. We're not putting ourselves in enough difficult situations to find that fire in the gut.
Yeah. What do you do now, 30 years later, from when you launched? I think you were class 124?
124.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's just a bit ago.
It's been a minute.
It's been a minute, right? What are you doing? Where are you going to find inspiration? How are you challenging yourself to find inspiration?
That's a great point. Great question. I actually had gone through a program called the Honor Foundation. It's a transition program when you're transitioning from active duty to civilian world. So you chose to leave the active duty command, military, but you need to find your passion. In other words, if you don't want to go out and do the same thing over and over and act like you're going through the motions, you want to find your passion. So every day is not a work day. Every day is a passion day. I looked at the things that brought me joy, brought me happiness.
Yeah.
So at some point I wanted to travel. I love to travel, like to do hard things. But I wanted to do it with some positive impact, like yourself, your message, and then bringing something to the table and helping other people. So I started an Epic Charity Challenge event, and it's kind of a standalone where we identify different things that happened in the world where the civilization took one direction or another direction, and we go and kind of emulate that. So we'll trace the Sparta Death March or the Sparta March from Sparta to Thermopylae.
Yeah.
And that was a point where civilization definitely took one turn for the better. And doing that by raising money for another foundation or something that will exponentially increase your impact. So every step you take on a 100-mile march, you're actually getting money and gathering money for a charity foundation that's going to take that money and do bigger and better things with it.
Yeah. That event specifically was a 100-mile march?
That was a 275-mile. We traced the Sparta, the 300. You've seen the movie. So we traced the route from Sparta to Thermopylae in 8 days over in Greece. And if you've ever seen a topographical map of inland Greece,
I was just going to ask.
One mountain every day at least.
Yeah.
But that was very challenging.
Yeah.
But how I think that we overcame that challenge is I had a couple of buddies with me who had prosthetics. One had above the knee amputee from Afghanistan, lost his leg on an IED. He was on it, and he was going every day, And I had another good friend of mine who was born with no arms and no legs, Kyle Maynard. We put him in a
no arms, no legs.
Right. So he had just come from climbing Mount Kilimanjaro when he came on my event. So the guy's a stud. Just not another word for him. But he was on a bicycle and with arm cranks, hand cranks, basically using his nubs to do 5,000 pull-ups a day equivalent.
Yeah.
And so those guys were on the event with me, right? And then so when my buddy Ferris and I we were hiking, and we were 25 miles into a 30-mile day, and he stops on the side of the road and takes off his walking boot and puts on his blade. And so he's going to start running, right? And the last 5-6 miles in, like day 6, we're still doing 30 miles a day. And I'm like, well, there's no way you're going to leave me here on the side of the road, so I'm going to run too. And people would come up and someone would try to say, well, my knee hurts. And I said, well, go talk to Ferris about your knee because he doesn't have one.
Yeah.
See what he has to say about that.
I saw a great quote about that. I'm not recalling the fellow's name, but he was a double amputee.
Mm-hmm.
And his quote was, I would rather have no legs in my attitude than my legs with your attitude.
Right, great quote.
And it was really inspiring in terms of people that are able to shift perspective. And there's many that can make the choice, okay, he's an amputee and my life is over. I'm no longer of impact. I'm damaged goods. And just the opposite. He pivots that into something even greater.
Yeah, that's so much inspiration to be had from looking at people. I mean, it's easy to be a victim, right? It's so much harder to look at your situation and get inspiration from it and not be victimized by it.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to be able to turn that page and make something lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah. Let me ask you, you've had moments where you're challenged and going like, oh, I've had moments, let me make it first person, where I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm too far over my skis, or what am I going to do here, without clarity in terms of how to press on, and then looking for that inspiration. When you're in that space, what do you do? What do you do to find that next gear, to find that next surge of energy to go, okay, I can keep going?
Right. So my personal perspective is if you're in a situation where you need more confidence, you have to look at what did you do to get to that situation? How much training have you done? And then what's your mindset right now? You can always murder board it. What's the worst thing that could possibly happen right now if I continue down this path?
The term is murder?
Murder board, yeah.
I don't know that.
Yeah, murder board is when we're planning an operation or something. You come up with the operation, and then you brief the operation, and then the entire room gets an opportunity to say, okay, what happens if? This happens, and if we get compromised here, what do we do? So if you, and it's sometimes disrupting to do that because you've got this plan, but then there's 10 other people trying to pull it apart or pick it apart.
Yeah.
But then that makes you have a plan for anything. So you're not in a reactionary sequence, right? You actually have thought about this might go wrong at this point in the operation, and this is what I'm going to do to counter that.
Yeah.
And I think that if you take whatever you're going to do and you turn it upside down and say, okay, what am I going to do if this goes wrong here? Then you're not reacting. You have a plan.
It's proactive versus reactive.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be 100% plan, 80%. And but you've taken the first step. And after that first step, you get the second and the third. And you don't have to come up with the entire concept. The first step is the most important one, right?
Still a daily practice? Do you do this murder board in your mind when you come into certain situations?
Yeah, you try to keep yourself from having to put yourself in those situations, but I think every time you do, you feel like you're a little bit more alive.
Yeah.
I go flying with a good buddy of mine, Brad Ramber, who's here now.
Yeah.
So I put myself in the cockpit with Brad, and he's an expert pilot. So I feel pretty confident. Mm-hmm. But then when he gives me the controls, said, okay, you got the controls now. Then I'm like, okay, well, what's the worst that could happen here? Well, we could fall out of the sky, but I feel pretty confident with Brad over here next to me, so that's not going to happen. Yeah. So the best thing I can do is make the best out of the situation and not panic, keep your head together and continue to fly the path.
Yeah. You mentioned a panic moment, at least what I think would create an adrenaline dump in me. We have the Boeing Spearman behind us. And I asked if you had been up in a biplane, and you said, yeah, I parachuted from one. But tell us the story of that parachute.
We actually I was active duty on the East Coast on one of the teams, and we got an invitation to go do a demonstration jump at the Rochester, New York air show, which is a huge air show.
Right.
planes like this are all over the place. So after we did our demonstration jump in a C-140, 141, then that 141 flight was historic to me because we were about to jump out, and the pilot, we were maybe 30 seconds out, and the pilot says, "Okay, everyone to the front of the fuselage," and the ramp's on the back.
Yeah.
Right? So you go, well, what's he
going on?
talking about?
Yeah.
He said, okay, everyone moves to the front of the fuselage. So the green light comes on, and we're still at the front of the fuselage, and he turns the airplane on the tail and just almost does a vertical. Everyone free falls all the way through the fuselage, out the ramp.
Come on.
No one hits the ramp, or no one hits anything on the way out.
Yeah.
So that was the first part of the jump was going through the fuselage on the 141.
Yeah.
So we landed there, and then there were some biplanes. I'm hanging out. I had my parachute gear still on and stuff, and one of the pilots came over and said, "Would you like to take a ride with me?" I'm like, "Well, what are we driving here?"
Yeah.
He's got a biplane just like the steerman. So he said, "Bring your parachute." So I had a smaller parachute than the military rig. So I got a small parachute, and it was about a 90 square foot. It wasn't, it's like driving a race car instead of a dump truck. So I took that. We went up in the aircraft, and he said, "Okay, you ready to go?" So he basically inverted the aircraft. I dropped out the back seat, and that was my second jump of the day.
You were dumped.
Yeah,
both.
it just basically dumped me out. And
So perfect segue. Those are flashpoints where doubt can creep in. I don't know what it would be like watching the fuselage of a plane escape me or me escape it. But is there ever a flashpoint of doubt where you're going like, okay, what the?
I think you could turn that doubt into fun. It's like when everyone was free falling through the fuselage, all I heard was guys screaming like Girl Scouts. Like, yeah! So there was really no doubt there. But if you think, how do I approach this? And if there's self-doubt, how do you approach the self-doubt? You turn that fear, because fear is a motivating factor. You turn that fear into something that is going to benefit you instead of be a liability.
And is that a trigger, or is there an active step that you take in order to take that raw fear? God gives us fear, so it's not denying that you have it, but being able to then invert it into something positive or something productive.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you talk about God gives us fear, that fear that you have, and it could be of losing your life, losing a limb, losing someone else. But if you know that there's another place, there's another time that you're not going to completely lose everything of your consciousness, and you feel that, I think that will help you go into those situations and go into that part of your life a little bit easier, with a little bit more steadfast.
Yeah. Let's shift gears. There's a percentage of the special warfare community, the military community, that has to wrestle with PTSD, or PTS as they call it. And that's fighting a lot of things that are going on between your ears, a lot of trauma, right? And I'm assuming it creates these moments of fear. Like, I don't know if I'm going to survive. In that environment, is the same application apply?
If you're talking post-traumatic stress syndrome, so I have a little bit of experience with that, and I've talked to a lot of guys. I just came off of a honor flight 2 weeks ago with Vietnam War veterans. Some of those experience those things, and then before they put a label on it, PTSD, it was just trauma, war battle fatigue, things like that, World War II. People experience that anytime they go into combat, or anytime you have something that is extremely outside of your comfort zone. Someone who's never been in combat can get PTSD. So I think when you try to harness that, and a lot of people who leave special operations or the military in general try to recreate the camaraderie that they feel. And veterans don't really talk about PTSD unless they're around other veterans. That's when you can open up about it. That's around other people that may have experienced the same thing.
Yeah.
I know a couple of years ago we did a honor flight to D.C., all World War II veterans, and most of them were pretty sublime. They were low-key the entire time. We were taking them around all the memorials and everything. And then when we got back to the hotel on Saturday night, my friend who was videotaping the entire trip, it was like, oh, I guess they're pretty tired here. I said, watch, bring your camera, follow me. Went into the bar, and we waited for these guys to come in, and they got a beer, and then they started talking amongst themselves. That's when you wanted to be a fly on the wall, because that's when the stories were coming out. It's not something that they're going to share with their families, because face it, your family you couldn't really realize what the guys went through. You couldn't put yourself in that situation. But when they're together and they can talk, and that's why there's so many programs now that try to get veterans together. Outward Bound, I went on a canoe trip in the Boundary Waters with Outward Bound, and it was only for Afghanistan veterans. And once we got there, they were trying to do some counseling. It's like, is there anything you guys want to talk about? It's like, no, we just want to be left alone. We want to paddle. We want to talk amongst ourselves. Right. And then I think that's where you make the inroads, and that's where you make the positive reinforcement that, okay, other people have been through the same situation that you have been, and they've come out of it. So why can't I?
And I want to dive deeper there. We're going to have someone join us, Damon Friedman,
right.
The founder of Shield of Faith, and he's addressing this issue head on in terms of his efforts to arrest military suicide, his efforts to point people that are struggling with PTSD and be productive instead of destructive with what's haunting them from the trauma that they've been exposed to. So I want to come back to that, but I really appreciate this thought that you've given us in terms of being proactive versus reactive, and the murder board in terms of you have a plan, but there's already thought through pivot points.
The enemy always gets a vote.
Yeah, right. Enemy always gets a vote.
Right.
Well, and with that, we'll close this episode and stick with us. We're going to bring Damon back with us and Lance Cummings and really talk about maintaining inspiration and rebuilding inspiration and just living your life with that same purpose of life has no hold on me other than the things that I presuppose on myself, those self-limiters, and letting those go so that you can achieve and pursue and aspire to do things like run 278 odd miles across Greece. Yeah, I haven't done that either, but I appreciate the time. Let's break here, and we'll be right back. You're with the Be Positive cause, the home of optimism, hope, and encouragement. Stick with us. Thanks for joining us on the Be Positive podcast. You can find us at YouTube, Spotify, Apple, on social media at Be Positive Cause, or at our website, bepositive.life. This is the home of optimism, hope, and encouragement. We invite you to join us and become an ambassador of optimism.